Good morning. It's Nancy from Nancy Chu Homes. I am going to do a little bit of a deep dive today, and I'm going to ask your permission to follow along. I know that I'm going to show you some charts, and the charts are going to be kind of tough, but we'll talk our way through it, and I promise you it's going to be really interesting and really enlightening, okay? So the big thing that we're kind of coming up against is this idea that all these people we know that are looking to buy or sell, that demand is very pent up right now. Like people want homes, but they're feeling like they can't do it right now. Oh, I got to save a little more money. This is what I want to do. Sellers feel the same way because sellers are really just buyers who want to buy something else. And then they really kind of have to sell their place in order to do it, in order to move on. And it's just been an interesting dynamic, shall we say. And for all of those folks who are on the sidelines, whether it's I can't find anything I like, or now I'm feeling picky and choosy because there's too much inventory for me to choose from, depending on where you are in the country, or I don't like these interest rates, I'm going to wait for them to drop. The interesting thing about this is the value of a dollar is just not the same as it used to be. And I know this because how many times have you heard someone who's older in your life say, well, the dollar ain't what it used to be. You used to be able to buy all of this. You've seen the chart. I've sent you the chart. The chart clearly says that in 1940, a dollar bought you 3 pounds of sirloin, but in 2020, it buys you one Wendy Frosty. And now we're pretty certain we don't even have the Wendy's Frosty on the table for this either. So if you think about the time value loss of money, then in some ways, you kind of have to think about the mortgage situation in the other direction. And bear with me, okay? I put together some charts for you based off of an actual home, and I'm going to show them to you right now. Okay. All right. Thank you for being patient and waiting to look at this. So, listen, the reason why I wanted to talk about this with you guys is you really have to understand that here in the United States, we have this concept of the 30-year mortgage, right? And this 30-year mortgage fixed rate is nothing. No one else really has this. It's really this middle class hedge that's designed to lock the cost of living for folks who, just live and exist and work, right? Folks who have the ability to purchase a home, they're trying to lock that cost of living down for 30 years for essentially an adult lifetime. And it's actually an amazing tool. And whether or not you value it, hopefully you'll value it after we go through this. So here is the first chart that I'm going to show you. We're going to look at the same chart. We're going to build onto it. So in 2010, a house was purchased for $475,000, 20% down. So it had a mortgage of $380,000, which you'll see right here. And it was taken at a 4.5% interest rate. Okay. I know this house exists because it is my house. It's a house that I purchased. So I just want you guys to see in 2010, the rate at that time was about 4.5%. Very actually, it was a pretty good rate at the time. And what I did was I went from 2010 through 2023 for where we have actual historical inflation rate data. So if you look here, right, this is the historical, average inflation rate for that particular year. And in the third column, what I did was I took the concept of a dollar, right? We took the concept of a dollar and we said, given the inflation, so in 2010, a dollar was worth a dollar. So we're going to look at the value of a dollar based on 2010 money, which is when I bought the house. So just so you understand, here's 2010 a dollar. By 2011, at 3.16% inflation rate, that same dollar in 2011 was only buying you 97 cents worth of product compared to $1 the year before. And as you sort of keep going through as you can see, in 2022, we had the big inflation jump, of 8%. But as you can sort of see, by the time we reach 2023, my same dollar only buys 72 cents, which is like 3/4 roughly of what was that same dollar that I had in 2010. So the first conclusion, and it's a very interesting conclusion, that first conclusion for me is, oh my gosh, every year I save a dollar, that dollar is actually worth less. So it's very interesting because I literally just had some clients come to me and they were kind of like, well, you know what? We're paying $5,500 for rent right now. We're thinking about moving and maybe only paying $4,500 for rent. And we're going to save money every month. And then, we're going to come back and buy next spring. And I was kind of like, so what you're telling me is you want to save $1,000 every month. So that's going to turn into $12,000. So you're going to save $12,000 in a market area where we've seen, about 11% increase in prices from last year to this year already. So, the Northern New Jersey, we have that problem, right? Because we have the inventory problem. And I was kind of like, so I'm trying to figure out how that 12,000 is going to help you. And it was so interesting. They were kind of like, and I'm like, as a matter of fact, I think the market's going to get away from you in the meantime, because, you're busy saving chump money. And, chump change, you're saving chump change in hopes to battle. Now, in a different market, that 12,000 might really make a big difference. But my instinct is your rent might not be that high anyway. So your saving capability wouldn't necessarily be at that level. And it was very interesting because by the time they were done, they were kind of like, yeah, why are we doing that? This seems really silly, because the house prices are just sort of keeping going up, right? So I don't want them to be chasing that ball. Okay, so here, I'm going to share my screen again, and we're going to keep going on to this particular chart. Okay, so now this explains to you, this column E, of course, now explains to you how money behaves, right? So the nominal payment, which is the numerical payment, monthly payment for my mortgage, is $1,925. And notice that it's been $1,925 since 2010. So look, this is presuming I have not done anything like, I don't know, refinance to a lower level. This is keeping it at 4.5%. We're going to be very conservative here. So my payment is $1,925. So in 2010, based on the based on the $1 value of 2010 money, then my payment is worth $1,925. But as inflation goes up, then you have to think about it this way. My payments the second year average out to feel more like $1,866 in the year 2010. Does that make sense? So out of 2010 money, I've saved a little bit of money. And if you go down this row and look at inflation, think about it this way. By the time I reach 2023, the payment of $1,925 that I'm making it now feels like what would have been the equivalent of $1,377 back in 2010. Now, why is this a thing? It's a thing. And what I did here on the second page here is I took that same, chart, and anything in the green is me projecting out forward. And what I did was I utilized, a very low rate of inflation. I utilized the target rate of inflation at 2%. Okay. And I bore it out all the way to 2040, which would be the end of my 30-year mortgage, right? So at 2%, the time value of the dollar continues to drop. And by the time 2040 rolls around, and by the way, these numbers would be even more extreme if we're looking at inflation numbers higher than 2%. Don't forget, I'm using that, to project forward, but there's a strong likelihood that there's going to be some fluctuation up and down in there, right? So by the time we hit 2040, my monthly payment is still $1,925 for principal and interest. But at that point, due to the rise of inflation, my payment of $1,925 only feels like what would have been $984 back in 2010 when I started this purchase. Okay. Now, why is this a thing? It's a thing because your money, right, your money situation, as inflation goes higher, it actually sort of reduces the impact of the debt. That's really what it is. Because by 2040, is 1925 going to feel, as tight as it did in 2011 and 2010? Probably not, because you've had a lifetime of earning power that you've been able to, sort of grow in your work situation. And that number has been locked in. And once it's locked in, if to be able to lock in, think about it this way. Imagine if you could lock in your cost of living, even if you were renting, if you could lock it in for 30 years and never have it go up, right? This is what the 30-year mortgage is designed to do. It's designed to lock you in so that for 30 years, your taxes are going to go up. Your insurance is going to go up and down depending on what you choose to do. But your main principal and interest will never change for 30 years. This is the middle class hedge. It is designed to protect middle class Americans so that they can live starting sort of earlier in their lives, purchasing a home and locking that security down. Okay, now here is the most important part, and I promise you this is worth it, okay? So on the right here, this is the same chart, and what I've done is I have taken the, right now, I believe the average year over year home growth is roughly 4%. Okay. And then just so you know, even when there are things like recessionary behaviors, you'll see that 4% dip, right? You'll see the values dip. But then as we saw in like 2008, for instance, we saw that value dip. But then at the same time, we then saw post, as the recovery was happening, we saw the values come up and go over. Okay. So it averages out in the long term to be roughly anywhere between 3.6 and 4.4% of home growth year over year when you look at, the long tail. Okay. We're not talking like, don't look at it year over year. I'm just saying, because like right now, between last year and this year, we're up 11%. But in the long historical chain, 4% year over year home growth is, the rule of thumb that I would go with for a national number, right? So what I've done here is I've taken this 30 years of home growth. And what I did was I went, okay, so what happens if I roll this down all the way through 2040? 4% home growth year over year, which is what it averages out to be. Okay, so 2010, well, I bought the house for 475 and now the house is worth almost 800, right? So right now it's worth, in 2023, 2024, it's worth probably around 800. Okay, so by 2030, we're looking at over $1 million. And the number is rolling pretty and crazy, right? Like, so by the time I get to 2040, I have got myself here at about 1.5 million for the value of this house. So I'm just thinking about this. I've grown my house value over 30 years by about 3 times, just following average national growth behavior of property, of home values. And at the same time, I've locked in my nominal, monthly payment at $19.25, and that's not changing. Isn't that interesting? Isn't that interesting? Think about this. The only way to lose at this game is if you purchase a house and you try to behave speculatively, as in like, you speculate, as in you buy a house and then you say, well, I'll sell in the next couple of years, right? This game, it's not even, shouldn't be a game, but for some people it is. This particular thing only works if you hold on to your house for at least 3 years. That's been my experience, right? You don't, you try not to sell during, a down cycle of the market. And yeah, you maintain the home. The only way you really lose at this, other than those things, is if you don't buy at all. Because if you don't buy at all, then you never get any appreciation. Like, think about it this way. This is all about appreciation. And the only way you lose is if you don't have anything to appreciate with. Okay. So one of the things that at the bottom here, if you can see the 51% and the 2907, I thought about this and I thought, the 980, by 2040 at 4.5% rate with 2% inflation, right? Don't forget, this is just, us spitballing that these are sort of, standard numbers. This 51% number is kind of like, that's what it feels like now. The 984 bucks is about 50% of what it would have felt like in 2010 to pay 1925. And so I thought about it and I thought, how does that feel the opposite way then? Then if it feels the opposite, if it were to go the opposite way, then it would be the equivalent of, if I take that 51% and I apply it to the nominal payment, then it would be kind of like, it would sort of feel like if the payment was actually 2,900. Does that make sense? Like, in other words, this number would now be 2,900, and we would have slowly watched that. Not like, in other words, if we kept up with the value of $1 being $1 every year, right? Instead of looking at the time value of that dollar starting from 2010, then it would be the equivalent of, we now pay 2907. Although the truth is, you and I both know that interest has been, the inflation rate has been more aggressive than that. So I know that this has been kind of like a super intense, probably borderline on boring way to look at it, but it's really been important to try to get consumers to understand why we talk about real estate as being a solid investment. Because listen, for me, every person in this world and every family in this world, every couple in this world, you have to have some sort of investment vehicles for yourself, right? You have to find a way to create enough cushion for you in retirement that you can have an acceptable lifestyle. I know I'm not necessarily a person that's going to be super comfortable just depending on Social Security or just depending on a 401k. I do think that having something within your portfolio that is, a touchable, tangible asset like a home, I think is important. And, that's really my goal. Like, as a real estate agent, I'm actually a person who kind of works as the financial advisor for consumers based on the real estate portion of their financial portfolios. It's really about wealth building. And I just wanted to break it down in a way so that you guys could, go back and look at the charts again. I know it was a lot, but I guarantee you, look at them again. They're interesting. And they really point to, when was the best time to buy a house? Yeah, 5 years ago. We know that. 10 years ago. Should have gotten started right away. But it's never too late. And you can get started today. All right. I'll see you guys next week.